So greetings from Pennsylvania. Once again, we're back here at Fort Loudon in Franklin County, kind of in south central PA. We've been here a number of times for the French and Indian War series, and they had different events going on here in the past, like a little different reenactments. It's like they have something like that going on now. I see different people dressed up in different military attire from different periods. I wasn't expecting anything to be here today, but we're here for a different reason. This video is about the Black Boys Rebellion. Just quick pull over right here. There's reenactors down there. They were just unloading a tank off up here. You can see the fort over there. Like I say, a lot of you might recognize it. So I'm not sure what event is going on. Wasn't expecting anything today. I see tents up there too. A lot of you know I'm starting my Revolutionary War series here in Pennsylvania soon. And although the Black Boys Rebellion is not officially part of the Revolutionary War, it's kind of a bit like I'm going to call it like a prelude to revolution. The first kind of rumblings of it in a way. I just wasn't planning on all this being here today. We might take a quick look, because I know there's a plaque for the Black Boys Rebellion here. It occurred right here at this spot. But I just wasn't expecting all these people and noise here today. Other times I visited, I had the whole place to myself. Alright. Yeah, here in this one plaque, they have a little bit of information about it. We'll talk more about it though. Yeah, when colonists destroyed a vast quantity of trade goods in March 1765, we'll talk about those trade goods. These Highland soldiers at the fort made arrests and sought to snuff out the unrest by force. In doing so, they became embroiled in a 9-month colonial uprising referred to as the Black Boys Rebellion. And here's the fort once again. Like I said, we've been here a number of times. We've been here when they fired off that cannon there. Yeah, there's the tank. You have some people from all different eras here in uniforms. But they do have a monument here to the Black Boys, and James Smith was their leader. Dedicated to James Smith's Rangers, known as the Black Boys of 1765. Actually, more like 1764. They protected our local settlers of the Coconachig against the Indian attacks. This monument erected by the Fort Loudon Men of Mountain Club, 2006. Says anything else over here? Nope. Yeah, so it's at this fort here where that rebellion took place. The men, Captain Smith's Rangers, the Black Boys, they actually laid this fort under siege for a time. We'll talk about why a little bit later, but this is where it took place, right in this area, the Black Boys Rebellion. But I think we'll find a more quieter place to talk about what actually happened here. Discuss the history of it. There's a lot going on here. I'm not really sure. I didn't really pay anything to come in. I don't think whatever's going on here didn't start yet, but so I should probably get out of here. But I'm headed up to Huntingdon County to hike a section of the Standing Stone Trail, so I think that's where I'm gonna head. I think while I'm hiking that trail, I'll talk about what happened here at Fort Loudon during the Black Boys Rebellion. But at least you can see where the event occurred. Here's the fort and all that stuff. So I think maybe we should head out. All right, so who was Captain James Smith and who were these Black Boys? So, get my cheat notes out. So, their story starts during the French and Indian War. I did a whole video on Captain Smith, James Smith. He was captured, I think on Braddock's campaign, he was captured by the Native Americans, but they adopted him into their society. He went through like that, where you run the gauntlet and all that kind of stuff. But then he escaped at some point, made it back to his home area, which was down in the Fort Loudon area. But if you remember, during the French and Indian War, and then again in 1763 during Pontiac's War, there were numerous Indian raids in the area. And to help combat that, they weren't getting a whole lot of help from the colonial government or the British, so they formed their own kind of like security team, and that was Captain James Smith's Rangers. And he was a perfect man for it because he had lived amongst the natives, knew their customs, knew their way of fighting, and he was a perfect man for that job. So that's where they started as. They were known as Captain Smith's Rangers. I'm not entirely sure where the term Black Boys came from. We might talk about that later, but they were never really known as that a whole lot. They were known as Captain Smith's Rangers. So this rebellion took place from March of 1765 to November 18th of 1765. So that date on that marker is right. For some reason I had in my head 1764, but it was 1765. So what happened was, at the end of Pontiac's War, the French and Indian War, proclamation was made. It's called the Royal Proclamation of 1763, where native subjects, meaning the Indians, it was forbidden to trade warlike goods with them, meaning guns and knives and stuff like that, because those kind of items were used against the settlers during the war. And so this proclamation was made, because that proclamation was made during Pontiac's War to prevent the natives from getting their hands on weapons like that to use against the settlers. So yeah, but then there's a dude named George Croghan, which we've talked about him in other videos. He was part of some of those campaigns. He was an Indian trader and things like that. Not the most honest and good person out there, but he came up with this idea. I think it was his idea. He had a huge wagon train load of goods that he was taking out towards Fort Pitt. But as he passed the Fort Loudon area, actually there was an inn nearby. I think it was in Greencastle, an inn. Does the name of it have it here? On my notes here. Hold on. Yeah, it was at Pauline's Tavern where this wagon train stopped, and one of the bags fell off the horses and opened up, and someone saw what they thought looked like scalping knives, warlike goods. So they reported it to other people, and it kind of spread, and to Captain Smith's Rangers, and they were greatly concerned because these were warlike goods, and these are weapons that had been used against them in the past during the Indian raids. They're like, hey, what's going on? These are not supposed to be brought out this way, but they were. They demanded that the wagon train be stopped so that they could inspect it, but the people running the train said no. And well, what did Captain Smith's Rangers do? Well, they caught up with the wagon train at a place called Sidling Hill, captured it, and burned all the goods. Got rid of it all. Yeah, but the people who were leading the wagon train then fled to Fort Loudon, where they reported to the British what had happened, and the British sent a patrol to the area to try and recover some of the goods. They did capture 2 of Smith's Rangers and took them back to Fort Loudon. Of course, took their weapons too. They were personal weapons, which comes into play later in the story. But Captain Smith and his men were like, you're not taking our men prisoner, especially since this wagon train was breaking the law basically and endangering our lives, and you did nothing about it. So I think about 200 or 300 locals laid siege to Fort Loudon. The prisoners were released, but not their guns. But that wasn't the only incident. There was another incident that followed later where some more men had been captured, I believe, and some more weapons had been taken. We'll get back to it a little bit later. I'm going to continue hiking on the trail here a little bit more. Get back to you later. I should back up just a little bit here in the video yet. One of the things that happened during the French and Indian Wars that started to bring out those frustrations of the colonials against the British government. Because some of the generals, like General Braddock, Braddock's campaign, that was a complete failure. But he was a very arrogant man, and he didn't listen to colonial leadership or anybody about how to fight. He thought he knew better, and that was a disaster. So there was already a growing frustration, a growing friction between the British and the colonials. And the French and Indian War started to bring that out. And then here in this incident where these illegal warlike goods were being illegally traded with the natives, weapons and knives and stuff that had in the past been used against the settlers to, murder them and all kinds of stuff. They were upset at, obviously the British just didn't seem to care. The British at Fort Loudon, like, that was their job to make sure that kind of stuff didn't make it to the natives. It was a royal proclamation. But the British did nothing to stop those goods from being taken out that way. And that's why Captain Smith and his Rangers, that's why they took matters into their own hands at Sidling Hill, caught up the wagon train and destroyed the goods themselves. So there's just that growing frustration. If you studied, the American Revolution, there were other growing frustrations, but this was kind of one of them. That's why I call it like the prelude to revolution. Prelude to the revolution. It's kind of like these initial grumblings of the colonies. And yeah, so after that initial incident with the wagon train that they, caught up to and destroyed, there were several other incidents like that. Some more prisoners were taken, prisoners were released, but the British once again kept the weapons, their guns. I think they kept 2 from before, but now were keeping a total of 9 of them. That was one of the big things with Captain Smith and his Rangers, or the Black Boys as they were called. Those weapons were important to them. Back then, you know, that was an important tool, you could call it, for the people back then. You know, for defense, for hunting. Most of those men were part of the militia. That was your main weapon. You needed that weapon. For the British to keep that was not cool for those, especially since, you know, the Black Boys and the local residents were calling the British out on something that they were, you know, illegal that was happening, that they were just letting pass. Like, they reported to the British that these wagon trains were carrying illegal goods, and they did nothing about it. You know, they called them out, took care of the matter themselves, and in return the British, you know, keeps their weapons. It'd be like, kind of like, you know, say you called out your local government for doing something illegal, and in response, you know, the officials confiscate your car. You know, out of, you know, like, okay, you know, I need my car. Well, yeah, but they're kind of retaliating against you. But anyway, at one point, you know, the commander of the fort, commander at Fort Loudon, his last name was Grant. At one point, the Black Boys captured him. He was just out on his horse by himself in the area, which is probably kind of dumb considering his relationship with the locals there, the Black Boys. But they captured him. But they promised to release him if the British returned their guns, and also the Black Boys wanted 2 British prisoners for themselves that they wanted to take to seek judgment against, I guess you could say, some of the men that had been involved in the counterattacks against the Black Boys. The British at Fort Loudon released the guns, but not the British prisoners when they gave Commander Grant back to the British. So anyway, yeah, because they had actually laid siege to the fort once again to get those things back. Alright, but that kind of ended. After that incident, the Black Boys kind of faded from memory in the area. You know, the things kind of tied down. There's a few other instances. There were a few other groups or people who were kind of impersonating the Black Boys that he had issues with, but that kind of faded from the area at that time. But keep in mind too that this is just kind of a summary of what happened during the Black Boys Rebellion. You can always look up more information for yourself online. Back to the old name Black Boys. Captain Smith and his Rangers, they used to smudge their faces black at some point, especially during the French and Indian War when they were acting as Rangers and protecting the area. So some people think that maybe that's where the term Black Boys came from, but they had stopped doing that at some point, especially during the time of the Black Boys Rebellion, because if they found paint like behind your ears or anywhere, you got arrested as being one of the Black Boys. So that might be where the name came from. They're not quite sure. There's only one account where they're referred to as the Black Boys. Some British officer calls them that. But locally, they're known as Captain Smith's Rangers. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's one of the first times that the colonials actually rose up against the British. You know, it was just there at Fort Loudon, but they laid, you know, colonial forces laid siege to a British fort. So, like I said, it's kind of the rumblings, the prelude to a future revolution coming up. Yeah, and then, you know, the war broke out in 1776 for the revolution, but there were incidents prior to then, including the Black Boys Rebellion, that all kind of lead up to that. We might do another video, too, on incidents that are leading up to the revolution as part of this series. But yeah, I wanted to do this Black Boys Rebellion before I got full scale into the American Revolution here in Pennsylvania. But I think that'll be it for this video here, folks. From Fort Loudon to the top of, I'm not sure, I think this is Jack's Mountain up here. It's called here on the Standing Stone Trail. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned a little bit of history about what went on here in Pennsylvania, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one.